Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. My name is Shobhankita and I'm a researcher in technology geopolitics with the Takshashila Institution. For this conversation, I have with me in the Takshashila's podcast studio, I have with me Bharath and Amit. Bharath and Amit, welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. And we have a very interesting conversation lined up here. We want to take stock of the news and rhetoric coming out of China vis-a-vis open source, AI, and what this means for sovereignty in this conversation. So there's been a bunch of things that have happened. So firstly, just sometime last week, China hosted the 9th iteration of its World AI Conference in Shanghai. And this was the first time that President Xi Jinping addressed the gathering. And he made a speech and it was very interesting, and we want to obviously go into that. But also there is talk about what Chinese open source models, as they get better over time, means for India's tech sovereignty. So this is the conversation that we have here. Amit, I want to first start with you and ask you to put this into context, right? What is the significance of this conference? What was discussed here beyond the rhetoric? And I think just in terms of, if you were to tease out from Xi's speech, what are the things that stand out? What are the key takeaways for us as policy watchers and analysts?
Thanks so much, Shobhankita. So I think the last week, the conference that we saw was World AI Conference. And it was the 9th iteration of that conference. Again, this began back in early 2010s, where this conference was largely a world internet governance sort of thing. But largely now it has morphed into World AI Conference. And this is this 9th iteration. What was different this time was this was the first time that Chinese President Xi Jinping was addressing the conference, and that is, I think, that attests to the fact that the significance that AI is now, occupies in their policymaking circle. Now, the message from Shanghai was clear. In Xi's words, AI presents a historic opportunity to bridge the AI and digital divides, and this to prevent new historical injustice in AI. So this was his message, and largely, if I to just, and we can go into this later. But largely, what he was saying, that this is AI is a global public good, and China is the one which is ready to share the benefits of this, unlike its American counterparts. Second is that the Chinese systems are as good as the Americans, and therefore, if you shift to Chinese systems, you would not be compromising on efficiency. And largely, the third point is the export controls haven't worked, or to constrain China's AI progress, that has not worked.
Got it. Let's start with the first one. So this framing of AI as a global public good, clearly, I think that's the rhetoric coming out of China vis-a-vis its standing in global AI governance as well. But what do you think is this framing? Which is, do you agree firstly that AI is a global public good in the sense that Chinese models have a disproportionate contribution to AI as a global public good? And if not, then what is the criticism for that?
See, if you have to look at AI, right, and even how even the American companies have leveraged on data, right, without user consent, etc., right. So, in that sense, if the way this whole thing came about, and the fact that not every other country in the Committee of Nations has the capability to field their respective models, I think in the sense, and the very fact that AI presence, it is regarded as the next generation of revolution after industrial revolution, right? So in that sense, yes, I completely agree. That is something that, and given the position that India, we ourselves are at, right? This presents an opportunity for us to make a lot of changes and get a lot of things done. So in that sense, yes, I would agree. And that's the messaging also from the Chinese. Would love to hear what Bharath thinks.
Maybe I'll start off with being a little pedantic and saying that what is the public good, right? So and the idea of open source, and is it really open source? So clearing some of these things first. So public good is something that's non-rival and non-excludable. So what Chinese AI models, when they're released as open weight models. So in the sense that you can host that model, the weights of that model on your own servers, and you can run it on your own. You don't need to depend on that Chinese company, at least for that model that has been released already. Maybe for future models, you'll still be dependent on them, but at least that is something that you can run on your own. It's still not an open source or open, the tools for maybe fine tuning it or, tweaking it. All of those might not necessarily be available, or even the data that it's trained on, all of those might not be there, right? So it's not an open, there are different gradients of open source, and this is just an open weight model. So that's one point to note. The second is, now when this model has been released as a open weight model, what does that mean, right? So it is non-excludable because this model has been released in the public. But is it non-rival? That again depends on. It needs, all of these models need a lot of compute to actually run it. So that is going to have a cost. It is not a trivial cost. So you still need to run it on your own servers, and that's going to be expensive for these bigger models, especially. So it is. I don't know if you can call it a public good, but it is something that's been released in an open weight fashion. Now, that said, I agree with what Amit was saying, that China's models have actually changed how the gap between the frontier proprietary models and the open weight models. So right now, we see that there's a lot of adoption, whether it's in the US itself, where a lot of US startups and a lot of companies are using it, or even in India, you see that the adoption of Chinese open weight models is pretty is huge, and there's a reason, right? So they're comparable in terms of performance to the frontier, and they're available at a fraction of the cost. So all of these make a difference in what kind of model you choose to see, and they might be able to offer this at a much lower price. For a lot of reasons, they've done a lot of genuine breakthroughs in terms of how efficiently they can run it, or it might be because of distillation, where they're extracting the essence of the larger, more resource intensive American models to come up with more efficient models at a smaller scale, which can run more efficient. So the amount of funding that they have invested might not be the same as some of the as the US frontier labs. So given these things, you see that there's a lot of Chinese open weight models that are being adopted by a lot of across the world, and I don't think the gap as it is right now between the frontier proprietary models and the open weight one would be as close if it wasn't for these Chinese companies offering this. So if it was just maybe the American labs offering it, maybe it wouldn't be as comparable to the frontier.
Yeah, just to add on this, because yesterday when I was writing this newsletter, I was kind of cautious whether I should use the word global public good or not. And yes, as Bharath said, non-excludable and non-rivalrous. In the sense, I mean, so long you have the compute, nobody is stopping you to use it, right? So in that sense, you could. I mean, I would classify it as something technically, even on technical grounds, as a global public good in the sense.
Got it. And I think the distinction is markedly political as well.
Yeah.
Positioning Chinese open source, open weight models as opposed to proprietary US models. Yeah. And it's also to say that the best open weight models right now are Chinese. And in that sense, I think some part of this argument holds. Let's go to the second one, which is your key takeaway from what Xi Jinping in his speech mentioned, which is that Chinese models are as good as the frontier US ones. I think that's debatable, although they may get the job done. But what is your take?
See, I would say, Bharat already talked about it. They're largely about 6 to 8 months. The gap that was usually put between the frontier proprietary models and then the Chinese open weight models, largely 6 to 8 months. And then some are saying that the gap has even closed further with the moonshots release. And I think Quen is also this week is coming out with its latest model. So, I think, and even if you look at I don't know, for the most complex tasks, I don't know, maybe the frontier models maybe still would be the way to go. But on bunch of usual tasks that you usually do, right? If you look at the traffic that is routed through open router, right? You see that most of the startup companies in America, more than 60% of the traffic is routed to the Chinese open weight models. Now they may be hosted on the American servers, but that's where the traffic is going, and that just goes on to tell you that they are as effective and as good on some of these usual tasks that you would largely not require the likes of Fable and Mythos, etc. So I think in that sense, the largely are good in that sense.
It's use case dependent. There will be some use cases where they may not be as efficient or as effective as the frontier models, but for majority of the use cases, given the cost trade-off, it makes sense.
Yeah, and also the fact that you have to keep in mind that there have been various restrictions that they have worked under. So, given the restrictions, and these restrictions have continued since 2022, and given the restrictions that they have faced, to have those restrictions play under those conditions and then to come up with, so there's some credit due in that sense.
Yeah, which is also his third message, right? Which is that these models exist despite export controls. And so what he's trying to say is that these export controls don't work. And I think that's something that in the purest sense of the word, we at Takshashila have also backed, in the sense that this is not like nuclear material where it's sensitive, traceable. This is complex two ecosystems between US and China, common research, common people who move from companies, take the knowledge and skills gained in one into the other. These are complex ecosystems, interdependent in one sense. And so, yes, export controls, as we have seen in the purest sense that, there are third-party countries and companies that smuggle these chips and so on. Export controls in the purest intention of denying access might not work. But I think if we were to go into some nuance there, maybe the answer is slightly different.
Yeah. So depending upon where you look, I mean, this is according to me. This is what I believe. Depending upon which level of the stack you look, whether you look at the chips, then you look at training inference, and then you look at diffusion and deployment. Right? I think at the level of chips, because of the restrictions that you had on not just on the export of chips, but also on the export of photolithography tools. Right? So I think that has worked. China has not been able to yet, even though they have prototypes of Huawei 950 SN, etc., which I think would rank in the top 10, the most advanced chips that we have. But the ability to mass produce it is very limited. It's just not there, in fact. And they have to do a lot of multi-patterning and stuff like that to get around and work with DUVs, right? So that is one restriction. But that does not mean that at the in terms of capability, they have not caught up. That they have. The problem is mass production. Second is with respect to inference and training. So this is again because they had stocked a lot of before the export controls came in, and then there are also reports about smuggling, right? Backdoors, smuggling, and third-party rerouting and stuff. So they have managed a good stock of those chips, I think, and coupled with their own homegrown chips. So I think on training purposes and inference, they have been able to make up for the shortfall. The only problem here is with which is what we're talking in the initial part of the conversation, is with respect to diffusion and deployment. Can they hold as huge customer base that the frontier proprietary model hold, and can they sustain them on their own servers? And I think there the answer is no, because they just don't have the capability to mass produce or mass import the kind of frontier chips that are required for inference things. But would love to what Bharath has.
I'll maybe add something in addition to, like, when you want to serve a global user base. One is you need to have the inference capacity to deliver these things. But a second factor could be that this is not something like an EV where you can just buy a car and drive it. It's something that has a cognitive element as well, right? So it kind of filters your perception of the world. It shapes your thinking. It's a cognitive tool. So would users across the world really be comfortable with using a model being served by a Chinese company if it's a proprietary model, would they be comfortable with that? In the sense that you have APIs, and they'll have a history of the kind of questions you're asking. Your data will be stored with them. The answers might be opaque in the sense that you don't know if there's any layering on top of it to filter the answer in some sense. So all of these are concerns, and so it's not similar to a battery or a solar panel or something like that. It's actually a cognitive tool. You've seen this kind of um, um, you know um, this concern being also a concern when it came to social media platforms like TikTok, where there was some concern about how it was used to shape public opinion in Taiwan, and the same would apply here. And that's something that, if it is a proprietary Chinese company serving that model, I don't know if that market for it would exist across the world. So that's it's not just that they don't have the compute. It's not. It's also that they wouldn't have a market as well.
Correct.
And so the choice to go open weight kind of makes sense, because that's the only way they could have got the attention of global developers in the way that they have. And it's also maybe a matter of bridging trust, in the sense that it's not behind a proprietary API, but it's actually, open weight and marketed as such.
And plus, it places China as a responsible AI player in the
Correct.
market.
Yeah, which also kind of adds to the rhetoric. And talking about export controls, yes, there will be leakage, but I think the argument goes that it will be too little and always with a time lag. And so, will that then enable diffusion to then eventually catch up to all the economic benefits that this technology promises, right? So, I think that's broadly the three things that we wanted to tease out from Xi Jinping's speech. And I think also, in terms of China's preference for open weight models, I think that's clear. The other thing that we do want to talk about in this conversation is about what all of this means vis-a-vis India's tech sovereignty, right? And I think we've had multiple conversations around tech sovereignty. It's ambiguous, it's amphibious. It's this term that not everyone seems to understand. They seem to define it all differently. Everything seems to be clouded under this ambit of sovereign AI. And typically, I think one approach is to be completely maximalist about it, which is that either you have it or you don't. And we treat it almost like land borders, that you don't have some control over your borders. You either have it or you don't. And so I think the perspective that's helpful for this conversation is to define tech sovereignty actually as a spectrum, in the sense that in different capabilities and different technologies you may have, and so it's a spectrum, it's a range. It's equivalent in that sense to power and being able to stand up for yourself. And so if you were to define sovereignty in that broad ambit, I think one argument, Bharath, that you and Pranay and a bunch of us have been discussing at Takshashila recently is that actually the way to, or one perspective for India's AI sovereignty could actually involve Chinese open source. And this may not be too surprising if you're a developer who's already been using Chinese models hosted on US platforms, and you can see that it's 1/10 the cost of Anthropic and it gets your job done. But I think broadly also for other use cases, there may be some value here. Do you want to talk about, I think, mainly, firstly, the first big concern that people have with Chinese open source, at least in popular culture, but also why that may be mistaken?
So the idea of sovereignty is, maybe you could think of it as the ability to make your own decisions about the technology that you're using. So in this case, if you're using a certain model, if you're using developing something, how do you get the best that is out there and on your own terms, right? So and when you think of it like that, you could say that you're going to do it all yourself and build all these capabilities in-house, but it requires a lot of investment, and maybe the Indian ecosystem is not at that frontier in terms of the of competing at the same level.
So the maximalist approach here might be it's Indian models, Indian data centers, Indian customers, Indian chips, or some combination of this, or a subset of this, which of course is not practical.
And it's suboptimal also, because if you're going to say we're going to do everything Indian, and every other model is outperforming in terms of the capabilities, then what you could offer to the public would be far behind the frontier, and that reduces the productivity of, say, someone who's using it for coding or someone who's using it for any kind of other application that they'll build on top of it, right? So it is not effective in actually diffusing the capabilities to a large section of the population. So that's one. So access and access on your own terms is how you can think about it in a better way. Now, if that is said, and you think of two different ways in which these frontier capabilities are being accessed, one is through a proprietary model in one lab, and the second is through an open weight model, which might be Chinese, but it's hosted on a different server anywhere in the world of your choosing, right? It could be Indian, it could be in the US or wherever. So the first one means that you have continuous dependence. It's an API or a subscription that through which you're using it, and basically every API call, every interaction, your data is stored with that company. All of that is a continuous dependence, and as we saw with Fable access being revoked, it could be turned on and off like a switch, right? So, and that depends on the national policy of that country in which that company is located. On the other hand, if it is a open weight model, then you host it on your own server. You are dependent maybe for future releases, but at least whatever is available, you can use it on your own terms. Your data is with you. There is this suspicion of backdoors being built into it. I'm not very sure how whether you can actually build backdoors into the weights itself. I don't think that is a process, but maybe you can program the weights in such a way that it would perform in a certain way or give a certain kind of response when asked a certain question, right? So that might be possible,
and that
but
may
maybe
not be reflected in the benchmarks.
Yeah, and maybe backdoors in the sense that this open weight model will reroute traffic or some data to a Chinese server. That might not be the real concern, right? So, considering all of this, you see that open weight models do offer a more sovereign in quotes, right? So, in terms of the access that they provide, and hosting it on your own servers could be a viable pathway to getting access to those capabilities. Again, to enable this, maybe you need your own data centers that can host open models from whichever country or whichever company is offering the best models out there, right? So maybe policy in the US also, there is some talk about not having access to Chinese open weight models within the US, and if such a policy were to come about, then maybe companies like OpenRouter also would have to think about these things. So having the hosting, being a neutral destination where you can host the best models wherever they come from. The country of origin might not be the biggest criteria here, but the terms on which you host it and access it is more important.
But one contention to that some people may have is that India, China have difficult relationships, and so do we trust Chinese models? Or it could be the experience that went viral when, for example, DeepSeek's models were deployed elsewhere, or and so on, right? For example, it refused to answer questions around Arunachal Pradesh or Tiananmen Square, and so I think there's a little bit of worry about what this means for the information we're consuming, given that India, China also have structural challenges in their relationships. How do we then square that?
So we did a simple experiment. I'll say that it is simple. I don't know how comprehensive the analysis or the findings are, but basically, when you access a Chinese model, what we did was access GLM 5.2 through OpenRouter, which is an AI inference platform. So basically, you can access any model, and they host those models on maybe a server in the US or in India or wherever. So I access the same model, GLM 5.2, on through OpenRouter and also through their own platform, which is this Chinese company providing a chat interface through their portal, right? So, and you see that a lot of the censorship regarding Tiananmen Square or regarding Arunachal Pradesh or whatever are these politically sensitive topics are layered on in terms of something that is filtering the output or filtering the input based on the kind of question you're asking. All of these are things that they have built on top of the weights. So when the same questions on Open Router are generating something that seems like a neutral response. It is forthcoming about politically sensitive questions and gives you a seemingly neutral answer. But when you ask it via the company's interface, it gives you Chinese company's interface. It gives you like a heavily censored output, right? So you see that at least at first glance, it doesn't seem to be that the weights of the model is where this censorship lies. And it might be harder also to implement it, build it into this weights, because you try to censor one topic, you don't know what else is getting impacted and whether the overall performance of that model itself will go down. So it might be harder to do it at something that's at a more fundamental layer.
Yeah, I think this is also consistent with Chinese regulation in 2023 on generative AI, which explicitly says that it applies only to those who may be providing interfaces, application level interfaces to end consumers. So that is chat, video, etc. But it doesn't really apply for B2B customers. And so this does seem like it's a layer over the models in itself. And so it then is context dependent, where the platform it's hosted, and so on and so forth. And so the opportunity then, I think at least the one that may make sense for India, is for India to develop capability for inference and hosting these models, their deployment sufficiently for India to be a neutral site for not just local domestic consumers, but also the global audience. But that would mean that Chinese open source or open weight models should need to be available, right? I mean, yes, it's a static set of weights and biases, weights and parameters that can once be downloaded. But as the models keep progressing and keep getting better, and the benchmark for what is the best keeps evolving as we go, how does that change? Because do we trust China enough to, or do we assume that there will come a time when China will restrict even the exports of these models, like it did with multiple other things? It's only a matter of time before they become very good, and eventually we will also be cut off from that. Is that a sense that you get?
I don't know. We have a running bet about when, till when this will be open. These frontier open weight models will be released from China. So that's, I think, maybe there are different factors that will determine this. One is what looking at it as a strategic technology and how what benefits it gives them. It's also hurting the US companies, so maybe they would like to prolong that for as long as possible. So there are a lot of factors at play here that determine this thing. But when you also see that these open weight models, when being served from a different server, are saying things which might be against what the party rhetoric is, that also creates some kind of a challenge for them. So a lot of factors like this will actually determine it. But maybe Amit
But
has.
I think one or two. So again, the thing that we discussed initially. So China has the capacity to host it locally. I don't think so. So it makes sense for them to do it or have open weights. Second, because China wants to place itself as a responsible AI, and only way it can do so is by putting it opposite to taking a stance that is completely opposite to the Americans, right? But and that means if the US models are proprietary ones, they have to back open models, right? But then also the question of till when will you continue to do so, because you also want to derive profits, etc., right? So I think the model going forward, what the Chinese might do, and there are some already hints of that, is what they might do is restrict the best of the models completely. They might have it a closed version of it, but the ones which are slightly lower and maybe in terms of capability, they might still have those open weights. I think that's how thing will go. And I mean, Pranay says 2028, 7,
And 2027 end of the year.
2027 end of year. I think it'll go on for a little long. I have changed my mind on that. I think so long China does not have the capability to host it locally all itself, it doesn't make sense for them to close it, right? Otherwise, you want to continue to project it as an efficient and a cheaper alternate with the American products, and then you might have more customers, and then you might not be able to service the needs. So it just makes sense for them to keep it open.
Yeah. So I think at one end is reputational risk that China will suffer for when they do this. But the other is there are multiple ways in which they can whitewash it for when and if when they want to do this, which is institute export controls. Like, for example, in their local communications about critical minerals and rare earth exports, they framed it as an environment question, that this was actually for the benefit of the environment, that they needed to be more environmentally conscious and mine less and export less and so on and so forth. So there are always ways to whitewash it. For example, I'm wondering if to justify the kind of investments that AI will take, this will not be placed as a business model conversion, that it's open source now, but we're not able to capture profits, and that then doesn't allow for investments into AI to come in. And so this is a business decision to close off a few models, right? I mean, there are multiple ways for when China decides, if it decides to, I think, whitewash export controls and access of its best models to the rest of the world.
Yeah, I think the next step would be to start pricing the open weight. And right now, they are available for free, right?
Yeah.
So maybe what they can do is put a hefty price on them. They're still open weights, but you pay a price for them.
Right.
That would be the next intermediate step before going on.
But that's hard to do because when you release the open weights publicly, anybody can host it. So Open Router is hosting it and on some other server.
But maybe before downloading, you pay a price and then you maybe download.
Yeah, I don't know how that would, because then it would not be an open weight model. It's still, it's not, the weights are not publicly open. So it's maybe a contract that
Open
you're
weight
signing with some company to share this. But again, on what terms and all that might be a challenge. So
yeah, I mean, OpenAI started out as a non-profit that then converted into a private limited. So we never know how business models can evolve, and you don't know how pressures from a national government can change for private companies. But I think there is at least a little bit of anxiety that I feel, because if this is the closing window between proprietary and potentially even open source, open weight that India faces, then what is the pathway for India, right? I mean, there seems to be a little opportune window to make the best use of this. Otherwise, for when those open weight models are not fully available, then that's a problem. So I definitely do feel a little bit of anxiety on that front. But I think even as they are available, we will still be dependent on mostly American chips and American compute. And I think that dependence and hedging is great in the sense that the model is Chinese, the compute is American. But it also means that we need to have that a continued access to that compute. And I think that's something that we can't underplay, because at the end of the day, the base is dependent and it's external. Did you have anything else to add?
Yes, it will be a difficult difficult thing for India to balance. If you want to go down this road, and it makes sense for India. See, you talked about sovereignty, right? So in the traditional sense, how the US maintained it was, I mean, having, and just if you take an example of the financial architecture, they had a dollar, they had dominance over SWIFT, and that's how, I mean, leveraging the whole ecosystem, and that's how they prevented sovereignty, and because they could, strike back with certain things. If you look at the Chinese model so far in the manufacturing world, it is largely through the manufacturing nodes, etc., having a control over supply chain, and then turning the knob on and off when if required, right? And here you have the two countries, the two leading economies, providing you two alternative sources. The only way to gain for countries like India, which do not have a program of their own, models of their own, or even compute capacity, is to play the both sides, just to retain leverage in the system, and so that you can preserve your sovereignty. And that's a difficult foreign policy game altogether. Two antithetical countries trying to balance, where you have a good relationship with one, the other you have very disturbed relationship. So I think, that would be difficult, but that is something that is also needed. Then, despite this being difficult, this is something which is needed.
Yeah. Thanks.
I think overall this competition has led to a better outcome for everybody, for the rest of the world at least. So it's good to have open weight models. It's good to have that ecosystem maturing and developing, and it in a way increases access. It enables diffusion. and that I think is where a lot of the benefits lie. So how quickly can you get some of this technology to different users, whichever sector they might be in, whichever use case they're trying to build. And I guess if you're the lower the cost at which you're able to do that, the without any restrictions and all of that. So I think that is the eventual outcome that we want.
I think the best way to, the country to follow here would be Kazakhstan. I think it's the only country that has managed to be part of both Pax Silica and WICO, World AI Conference Organization. So that's something which is quite, Kazakhstan being the country, being part of both the trusted partners of both the groupings. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, thanks for that interesting trivia. And thanks for this conversation, folks. I'll leave both your articles in the show notes for our listeners. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.